Hello and welcome to the Sociology Staffroom. I am really, really excited today because we've got a brilliant guest, someone that I've spoken to before. Doesn't need any introduction, but I will do. Dr. Pereira from Warwick University. You may have seen her work or read her work already as sociology teachers. But first of all, I'm going to, as we've pre-discussed, I'm going to call you Maria rather than Dr. Pereira because you were happy for that. Maria, first of all, do you mind telling me a little bit about yourself for those people that haven't heard of your work or are not that familiar? Just tell me a little bit about yourself. That'd be great.
Yes, so my name is Maria do Mar Pereira. It means Maria of the Sea Pear Tree, if you're interested. It's a whole discussion there we could have about the sociology of names and how they work in different cultures. I'm Portuguese. I have a degree in sociology from as my undergraduate degree from a Portuguese university. And then when I was studying sociology, I got really, really interested in gender studies. So I then specialized in gender studies after that, and have taught at different institutions in the UK and elsewhere, usually as a feminist scholar, as a feminist sociologist. So I sit at the intersections of sociology and gender studies. Um, and I'm really interested in doing ethnographic work, so doing participant observation and in all sorts of places. And the places that I'm most drawn to are places of learning and education. So I've done ethnographies in schools. So that my first book was a study of how 14-year-olds in a school in Portugal negotiated gender and sexuality in their everyday interactions in the playground. And then after that, I did some work in universities where I was interested in the kind of covert sexism that we see in university corridors, and university meetings, those sorts of spaces that are meant to be meritocratic, but that we know are not. So yeah, so that's me. I teach at Warwick on gender, feminism, sexuality, but also increasingly I teach on issues around identity in contemporary societies, neoliberalism, because I notice it's a topic that students are really drawn to and that I think they benefit a lot from thinking critically about. So that's me in a nutshell.
I know. Oh, well, and also super enthusiastic about sociology as well. I know you've
Oh,
got
absolutely. I
a
love sociology. And indeed, Katie saw me give a talk to students. I used to be the open day person at Warwick, so I delivered our open day talks to 17-year-olds 63 times. I counted, and one of the things I always used to do in these talks, I still do today, is open up with a couple of quotes about how amazing sociology is and how alive you feel when you study sociology and you start to notice the buzzing motion behind the seemingly solid world. That's a quote from Anne Seller. Where and it's one of the things I used to love about my job is getting these 16, 17-year-olds in the room, all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and tell them about sociology and get them excited. And I used to consider I had been especially effective if parents would come to me at the end and say, I didn't think sociology was a good choice for my child, but you've convinced me. And I'm, yes, convincing the parents is especially hard sometimes. So I'm such a sociology geek. I love sociology.
yeah. I'm a fellow sociology geek, as you know. Um, so I'm going to touch on that sort of passion for sociology. I know that you're really passionate about it. I'm really passionate about it. So my question is, why is it so important for us to carry on growing sociology as a subject, not only at A level, but obviously hopefully into degree, or even not, just pursuing that sociological inquiry? Why is it so important?
Well, one of the things that came out of my ethnographic work with the 14-year-olds in school was that well, I they knew from the start that I was studying them. I was very open about that. They knew I was writing a book. They got to read the book. We got to discuss the results even before I finished writing the book. And one of the things that several of them said was that participating in a sociological study, I sort of being put in a position where they were given a space to think collectively and critically about what they were doing on a day-to-day basis at school had changed their lives. And so these 14-year-olds, none of them really, maybe one or two, then went on to study social sciences and even to take sociology in secondary school. But most of them, they've gone on to do other things. But they felt that at that age, to have that space to think critically about their lives had changed their lives, because they had been able to actually change their behaviors, for example, in relation to bullying, in relation to how they interacted with others, how they saw themselves. And so I kind of think that with sociology, there's the question of why is it important to teach it as a discipline, as a degree, and but more importantly for me than that is to teach it as a life experience, as a life skill, as a way of being present in the world. And I think we've got young people at the moment in lots of countries that are very, very open to thinking about um, social injustice, about inequalities, about how the world works. Um, I think sometimes social media sparks that curiosity, but then sort of channels it into places that are not always the most effective. I.e., they then think they know a lot about the world because they saw something on social media, so now they're experts, and because they sort of think that mainstream media they're critical of, but social media somehow is more authentic. So I love how social media has opened up their appetite to think critically about life, but at the same time, I think more than ever, they're coming in with a whole range of fixed views about the world, that having a space in school to unpack collectively with others rather than individually on a screen or with others through a screen is really, really crucial. Um, and so and this idea of collectivity for me is really important, because one of the things I have noticed change in the sociology students that we get at university is that they're less and less open to conversation and interaction with other students. When I started teaching 10, 15 years ago, students would get to know each other. As you were setting up your seminar, they'd be chatting to each other, they'd study together, and now they don't do that. They actually consume their education. I use that word critically, very individually. In a very sort of lonely kind of utilitarian way. And I think sociology and a lot of, for example, feminist sociology that I use, it looks at how the personal is political, how the personal is collective, I think is such a helpful way of making them feel connected to other people, less lonely, less anxious. So I sort of see sociology as a discipline, as a way of looking at the world, but also as a way of understanding your relationship with other people and making you feel more connected to those around you. And that's so important in an age of great disconnection.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I totally hear you. It was interesting when you said that point about that sort of individualism and how the students consume it, because I've noticed that, and I thought that was just me, and I thought that's just me getting older. I'm 43 now, and so I'm thinking, well, it was a long time ago when I was at school. Maybe it's just I'm feeling that disconnect to what it was like. Maybe I was like that when I was young, but ultimately, maybe there has been that change in education, and how sort of information is consumed, as you said. People doing it on the internet a lot more, whereas before, and actually I've responded to that by moving students around in the classroom, so every half term
Hmm.
they have to sit next to someone different. And so I always talk about becoming sociology friends, and it's not for behaviour management, it's purely to get talking, to have those
Yeah.
discussions. So what can we do? I mean, obviously you see students in the undergraduate level and onwards. What can we do as A-level teachers to help prepare for that transition? So say, for example, my students chosen, and I've actually got a couple of students that go, since talking to you, do want to go to Warwick, and they are planning to apply as part of the UCAS
Yay,
programs
that's
next year.
wonderful.
Yeah, really, they really, really were enthused by you, and they're working very, very hard to get those A grades. But what can we do? What can I do as an A-level teacher to help prepare them for that transition?
It's funny because I would have given you very different answers maybe 5 years ago to what I would do now. If you'd asked me this 5 years ago, I would have probably focused my brain would go to more academic issues. So what kind of skills could you give them that would be helpful? And I would have said, and I think that's still important to some extent, um, but it's not so much a priority, I think, now. But what I would have said 5 years ago would be that The some many of the students that we get at university at Warwick, but also in other universities where I've taught, they come in um, really invested in an approach to studying and essay writing that is focused on what is the right answer, here is the right answer, have I got a good mark, rather than maybe stuff is complicated, maybe stuff is, there's different angles. And I spent a lot of my time saying, I don't want a
Oh,
neat, I want a clear essay, I want an essay that I can understand, but I don't want a neat essay with neat answers. I want you by the end to say, throughout the essay, to say there is this and there is that and there is that, and then they'll say, oh yeah, but at the end I choose a side. No, 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 no. I want you at the end to say, well, actually, maybe these two opposing things may be happening at the same time, or maybe, this is, you could look at this in different ways, and sometimes I may want to look at it this way, and other times I may want to look at it that way. So I would have said, and I guess I still say today, that the more that they are used to um, messiness, complexity, things being unclear, and contradictory, and being able to represent that instead of just flattening it to make it really simple and black and white and be able to take a side. So that was what I would have said without hesitation 5 years ago. Now I would say absolutely that, but also the biggest problem that we're finding now is, even before you get to the assessment stage, is at the point of participation. It's at the point of engagement. As I said, the students come in, they don't speak to anyone, they listen, and then they go. Sometimes they don't even come in. We're really facing an attendance crisis in universities at the moment. Um, we are, a couple of years ago, we put on a sociology festival in the summer. Like, we did amazing things. I tell you, I was so proud
oh,
of what we
share
did.
share one
It
of
was
the things. Share one of the things
well,
for a
we
sociology
did
geek
we did
to tell
things like
me.
we did really cool things. We spent a day in the nature on campus, thinking about the environment and sociology of the environment, and engaging with that natural space in lots of ways. We did a graffiti street art workshop with a sociology theme. We they got they Someone offered like a portrait drawing lesson, and they could draw their favorite sociologist. So just think,
Oh,
we had
I love
like
this idea.
we had little sorts of like pizza events and quizzes and things. It was really, really good. No one came.
Oh,
And
darn.
when you ask them, oh, we did a bird watching thing around campus, but like looking at also the sociology of nature conservation. Anyway, but almost no one came. In fact, most of the students that came were not sociology students. They were students from other departments. And when we asked sociology students why they didn't come, they all said, because we're so anxious. We're we're nervous about going to campus. Of course, this was also COVID was affecting this, but we're nervous of meeting other people. We're anxious, and so many of them would say, "I've got an anxiety condition. I've got anxiety problems." And one of the first things I do in my second year module, which is about identity, is that I sort of encourage them to think about categories like anxiety, rather than thinking about them as, of course, I think we should recognize anxiety and take it seriously, and, validate and all of that. But I encourage them to think about it not as just an inevitable truth about themselves. I am an anxious person. I will always be anxious. I can't do anything because I'm anxious. But to sort of think about it as a collective experience. People collectively are more anxious now than they used to be. So, how can we think about that? How can we change that? And so, I try to make them think of these experiences that they're having, that they think of as very private experiences. I'm anxious, I'm depressed, as collective experience. You're all anxious, you're all scared of each other. Why are you, like, look around at each other, like, make eye contact. And I think what I don't know what schools can do to change that, but because I wouldn't envy the work of school teachers, because it's very pressured, difficult work where you're juggling so many things. But if somehow we could get them to, yes, feel, experience their anxiety, but understand that not as a just a personal kind of illness or condition, but as a societal problem that we can get through by learning together, by working together, by life portrait drawing together, by bird watching together, then I think they would be able not just to have better results at university, but more importantly, have better experiences, human experiences of the process of learning at that level. They
So
don't even
interesting.
go to the students' union bars as much as they used to. They don't have sex as much as they used to. It's kind of a more structural problem of
Mm.
really fearing other people their age. And that's one example, I think, where social media has been really toxic. I think they fear other people their age because of what they see on social media, not necessarily because of things that have actually happened face to face with other people their age.
It's interesting because again, these are things that I've observed. And before we were talking, I was talking to you talking to Duncan, who does this, and I was having those things about exactly those things of how do we engage our students a lot more, and like you said, the individualized process, but also this be perfect idea. And I think it's interesting, like
Yeah.
um, I mean, how I personally resolve it as an A-level teacher is I don't actually give the grades back until I've gone through all the feedback, and they work on their own work and they self-assess it. And then once we've done all of that, I then will see them individually to talk about the grades. But ultimately, I feel that sort of like, you said not wanting to make a messy essay or make mistakes is then stopping them from the process of learning. And so it's almost like we have to go through the process of unlearning. And I talk about this to the students a lot, like be comfortable with confusion. Like it's okay I'm more confused now about sociology than I was when I started my A-level studies, because there are
And
lots of
that is
bits of
wonderful.
theories. Yeah, and I'm okay with that. Like, and it took me to a point where I thought, I had to be right. But actually, the more you learn, there's more nuances between theories and complexities, and obviously theories are written in times where I know we've spoken about, but like the narrative of gender has been so much more discussed in the public field. So that when I was reading it, say in the 90s, my understanding of it and some of my students' understanding of it is far better than sophisticated it
Yeah.
was when I was 17 years old. So, actually, it's really rich. Just interesting. I haven't really thought about this question, but it was when you were talking. Do you notice a difference between? Is there a gender difference? Do you think around the anxiety of students? I know I'm just putting on the spot there, and I know it's probably just maybe you're just obviously. I appreciate you might not be able to answer that, but is there a
I
gender
think
sort of?
I think there's several differences. I mean, we all, unfortunately, obviously, or maybe not unfortunately, or not obviously, I don't know. Most of our students are women, and so the students who identify as men who will come and do a degree with us, they're already like a very specific kind of masculinity. They're not, in a sense, representative of what masculinity would be. So I think they're already handling anxiety or experiencing anxiety differently to other students. But one of the things that I've noticed is that I think a lot of our women students will let anxiety, the anxiety they experience will constrain them more, i.e., they're more likely to, stop coming to things or not turning cameras on in online sessions, or not come to events than the students who identify as men. But I think they're better able to talk about it and discuss it than they are. So I find that the young the students who identify as women that I teach, they will be more timid, but they will find it easier to talk about problems and to get help for those problems. And the men students, they will put themselves out there a little bit more, but I think have a much more hard time finding, for example, friendships in the context of which they can talk about their experiences, or other spaces. So we've actually set up a little discussion group for men students, because we felt that they were, in a sense, needing a bit more help, actually, encountering each other, connecting, because there aren't that many of them, and many of the men students we have, they're feminists, so they don't want to come into a session and take up the space, like talk about their problems, because they're thinking, well, women may have it worse, so let the women talk. But then that means that they then are not talking about some of their own experiences, which need to be talked about, so much. So we've actually set a little group up for them, so that they can meet other men students, talk about these issues. And that's been a really, really interesting experience, because you notice in those groups them sometimes starting to cry, or talking about experiences that they're discussing for the first time in their lives. It's really fresh, difficult stuff for them. Whereas a lot of the women students, they will have talked about this before. They're kind of more processed in their anxiety. They've processed it more. They understand it better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because it's interesting. We had a conversation that not so long ago on the podcast about sort of the gender divide in the sense that the students who take sociology are disproportionately female, and we were talking about how do we also support our male students and encourage them to take sociology and feel comfortable about talking about feminism, because, like you said, they may identify as feminists but feel they can't contribute to a discussion around gender and feminism because they might not have the same lived experiences as the female
Yeah.
students. It's really interesting that you've created that group, and that's something maybe some of the people that have. I currently work in an all-girls school, although there are male students in the sixth form. It's interesting to sort of maybe look at that if you've got more of a mix within a school, or a big, also the sixth form colleges potentially where you've
Yeah.
got a bigger mix. That's really something that I hadn't even thought about as an idea, and it's
I
interesting
think
to
it's
hear.
a really we're piloting it this year. I don't know if we'll continue it. It's a difficult one to manage, because you don't. I know that some of the women students, when they found out, they were quite upset, because they were sort of like, well, what's this like men only space, and why are they getting this and we're not getting this? So I think it has to be handled in a really careful, sensitive, critical way, to sort of for that to be a space that where where you're undoing some of the problems of masculinity, rather than kind of reinforcing stereotypes that are quite easy to reinforce in a space, in an all male space like this. Although it's not entirely male, because I'm the one who runs it. But I think there's a lot of it opens lots of cans of worms, but that's sociology, right? That's the whole point. I often say, if there's no cans of worms, you're doing it wrong. If there's no dilemmas, if you know what you're doing it wrong, because this stuff is messy, it's complicated, and as soon as you fix one problem over here, you open up a new problem over there. And that's why I love it. That's why I think, I've been studying sociology for, I guess, 23 years, and just like you, I'm still like, oh my gosh, there's a new issue now that I haven't thought about, and I love that. What other field, other job allows you to do that? And that's also why I love teaching, because the young people that we're encountering are changing all the time, and that's new
Yeah.
challenges, new things to think about.
Well, that's one of my questions. I wanted to talk because obviously your specialist area is gender and gender identity, um, and and then lots of teachers. Gender is a core theme within the sociology A level, and obviously feminism is. And I've chosen also to do cultural identity, which has a real sort of emphasis on gender identity. And I'd really like to sort of unpick your brains on how we do teach some of the complexities around gender, because I know that we've spoken before, and our students' narrative of gender is a lot more enhanced than, say, like you said, we talked about this before, but we might have had those thoughts, but there wasn't the vocabulary to understand them back in, say, the 1990s or whenever people were studying. But then at the same time, those students have the narrative, they may not fully understand the narrative. Like my students talk about, obviously, toxic masculinity, and they talk about male gaze, but they have sort of an element of nothing critiquing YouTube or TikTok. I always call it the tickety talk to the students, because I just joke, I go, oh, the tickety talk, snappy chat. But like they have that understanding, but it's a little bit just off slightly, a little
Yeah,
bit
yeah,
sort of
yeah, I agree.
consumer friendly. So how do we, how as you as a feminist sociologist empower our students to talk about gender, but at the same time, what the challenges around that, the misconceptions, and how can we go about addressing that a little bit? So it's a bit of a big question there, but
Very big question. Yeah, how much time do we have left? I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of misconceptions, and I think the problem for me is not so much that there's a factual inaccuracy that you correct. It's the way that they approach it in general. I.e., because they've encountered a lot of this through social media, often in spaces where these things are presented as this is the correct way to do this. So this is the correct way to use pronouns, or this is the correct vocabulary to use, or this is the correct way to think, not just about gender, but for example, race, right? And my worry is not so much that they have incorrect ideas, is that they believe that these things are correct and these things are incorrect. And so we've had really interesting situations in my teaching. I used to teach a first year, also a first class, of course, first year module on
Of
sociology of
course,
gender.
standard.
A superb module, first year module on sociology of gender. And we had a really interesting situation in one year where one of the people teaching it with me is a trans colleague, and you had then some of the students who were cis students sort of correcting other cis students about what is the correct trans terminology, but in a way that was sort of like against what the trans lecturer was saying. And the trans lecturer was saying, look, you know, right now, this is the terminology that you use. But 2 years ago, it was a different terminology. 20 years ago, it was a different terminology. And people's own identities have been shaped in relation to those other terminologies. So you don't get, and that colleague actually said it in a really funny way. She said, you don't, as an 18-year-old, you don't get to come in and say all this other history is erased because we now use this language. And so you've got these really interesting situations where they're very good at understanding the current complexities, but they're not always very good at understanding the historical development of those, to understand the dilemmas that have surround these ideas, and they're very attached to sometimes correcting each other or being scared to say things incorrectly, so not saying very much. So, what I would say is at the moment, the students know so much more than they used to know when they arrive at university. But that actually makes my job harder sometimes because they come in knowing a lot and feeling very certain in what they know. I've had students say, well, I've already studied gender or feminism. I don't need to take your module. I say, I think you might need to take my module because they come in with lots of knowledge, great knowledge, and I want to celebrate that and really honor that and validate it. But also, I want to unpack the hell out of it, really deconstruct it and say, okay, so yes, you think intersectionality is great, but like let's look at the complexities of that. Or yes, you know that this is the right terminology that we use right now, but what is the history of that, and how might it change in the future, and what are the problems of being so confident that we everything is clear about gender now, because if things are very much in flux, they're very much changing. So so to so it is a really difficult art, I think, for us at university, for you at A level, to celebrate the knowledge that they have, and yet encourage them to not stay stuck to that, to ask more questions, to dig deeper, to be more critical, and to understand that these are fields and issues that you don't learn once and for all. You keep revisiting as society changes, as these things unfold, as you grow older as well.
Yeah, I was literally having this conversation yesterday. Bought a little sign that has 5 Ys on it, like just says word 5 times, and I hold it up, just to sort of encourage. But what? Just and I don't even know the answer myself. Like that's the point of the conversation. But why? But why? But why? And I was talking about feminism, and I was like, well, imagine you were part of the first wave feminism movement. You might have thought that's it, we're sorted. Do you know what I mean? Just as much as the second wave and so on. And so, and then sometimes I was trying to explain like exactly this. They might think right now that's it, we've got it, intersectionality. But there's going to be another wave. Do you know what I mean? And there'll be
Mm.
another debate, and they'll look back and go, "Wow, did they just think it was all sorted then?" and so on and so on. So it's really great to hear this from you as well, as a sociology teacher that's working in a degree setting, to see that it's how important to have those conversations. Because I think sometimes I personally get worried because I know it's not going to be assessed on our exam for the A level. But at the same time, like going back to our first question, which is why is it important to teach sociology? And for me, it isn't about teaching to pass an exam. Like it's more
Absolutely.
than that. It's about critical thinking. It's discussions. It's to have an understanding of the messy world that we live in. And these people are going to go off, hopefully, and live engaged lives and participate in life. And so, passing an exam is just one part of it, but sociology is so much more important. I'm conscious of time, but I've got two questions. My first question, which might take a little bit longer, and I appreciate it as I say it, I'm like, oh, obviously your research method is ethnography.
Yeah.
And obviously we read a lot about ethnography through our
Yeah.
textbooks. I'm looking at my A-level textbooks. But what is it really like? Because we talk about it in sociology, the issues, pets, practical, ethical, theoretical problems.
So I would tell you it is the most exhausting thing I have ever had to do in my life. Now I'm thinking, well, is it more exhausting than parenting? And anyway. So maybe I'm exaggerating, but I was not prepared when I did it, both with young people and with adults, how exhausting it was going to be, because it made me realize how much of our life is spent. Um, ha- um, Not necessarily on automatic pilot, but kind of only half paying attention to things. I would have considered myself a very diligent student that paid attention, but I realized that you in even the most attentive person, your mind wanders every once in a while. You looked over to the other side. Your brain, you know, rests for a little bit. And when you're doing ethnography, especially in a school, especially when you're interested in interactions between students, that means that you're observing a large group of people. Then that means there's always something potentially happening, right? And you're always, and to think about what you're going to have for dinner for 1 minute is enough to like lose the whole thread of an interaction that then you're not able to understand or to analyze. So the act of paying attention, the act of taking notes, the act of, when you can't take notes, of remembering, often like trying to remember the exact words that 14-year-olds have said to each other before you can record it somewhere, is just, I mean, unbelievably. I would be so tired by the end of the day. And then again, at universities, I would be observing conferences and classroom settings and meetings. And again, I realize how often in my day to day life I just stop paying attention in a meeting and then just kind of come back into it. But when you're having to pay attention all the time, and so I think ethnography is a fascinating thing to get people to do, even if it's just for 15 minutes, for an hour. I sometimes ask my students to do this, sit somewhere for 2 hours and pay attention. And I think it's a really interesting exercise in realizing something about the world, stuff that's happening around you, but also realizing what your brain is like, how you interact with the world, and how easy it is to not notice things, to walk around on automatic pilot. And so I love ethnography as a way of doing that really important sociological thing of looking at the world fresh, with new eyes, asking new questions, including those why questions that are so important. So I'm
Oh,
also a massive ethnography geek. I used to say that when I did my first ethnography, I said this was too exhausting. I don't want to do ethnographies again. I'll just do interviews or something else. And one day I realized I had ended up doing an ethnography, and I say, ethnography, you can't. Ethnography chooses you. You don't choose ethnography. It's like when you, even when you don't want to do it, it's can be so fascinating that you find yourself caught in its web. So yeah,
no,
I love it.
I'm personally never actually used it as a research method. I've always done interviews, but I feel like naturally I do. I mean, as we think about, like, I don't know, 12-year-old Katie, I was always like at a restaurant, or I don't know, even when I used to go clubbing back in the day, back in the 90s, as I did, I would always be inside outside, and I'd be watching and observing the interactions between people. And I used to find particularly the dating scene quite an interesting one to watch,
Oh,
and the sort of
absolutely. Yeah.
the codes, and I just and I find myself like people go, why are you not dancing? To me, it's just so rich with the mating game as such. It was
Yeah.
so interesting to watch, and the interactions, and particularly in sort of the non-verbal as well, because obviously with the loud music. But yeah,
Yeah.
um,
And if I can just add one more thing, I think young people are naturally ethnographers, right? And children, because they are having to pay attention, observe the patterns, the rules. So I've noticed, the young people who I did the ethnography with, they were 14 at the time, and that was a few years ago now. That was 17 years ago. So I did the ethnography with them at 14, but then when they were 24, so 10 years later, I searched for them, found them, and interviewed them. And then I'll interview them again at 34, 44, and so
wow.
on and so forth. And one of the things I noticed straight away was when I spoke to them as 24-year-olds, they were a lot less able. When I spoke to them as 14-year-olds, they were much better able to say, oh, I noticed this and I observed that and I found this pattern. When they were 24, they were already much more an automatic pilot. So even those teenage years are crucial ethnography years where they're doing it anyway. So to sort of teach them or show them how they can use it in a more methodical way is really fascinating, because I think we do lose those capacities as we grow older. Our brains are just not the sponges that they are when we're younger.
I suppose we normalise things as well. So when you sort of see when you're
Yeah,
young, you're a
yeah,
bit more,
absolutely.
it's all new experiences, but then what's interesting and unusual and unfamiliar becomes the familiar, I suppose, in that respect. And my last question,
Absolutely.
because I could talk to you for literally ever, I might, live
Most,
my best
me
life,
too.
apply again for an undergraduate, and come onto your
You
course,
know where
or
to
just
find
like,
us, warwick.ac.uk.
well, that was my last question. When are your? Do you know off the top of your head when your open days are? If not, I can put them on a link
Oh,
onto this.
well, at the moment we've got a few coming up, but they're the post application ones, so they're the ones for people who've already applied. But if you give me 2 seconds, I can search for that right now. We will have some coming up very very soon, and they're great fun. So apparently it's in the second half of June, and
Mm-hmm.
and then in October. So 17th
Brilliant.
June, 24th of June, and then the 7th and the 21st of October. And I'd really recommend,
I'm writing them down for my students.
coming to visit us. But also, what I would say is, if you're school teachers with kids, they're not kids, with young people interested in thinking about sociology, we're also very happy to, have you visit us and do some activities with us, or
Oh,
come and visit your schools. We're really so myself and so many of our colleagues, we really enjoy, working with young people. And I always say they are so much more excited by us than our own students. Our students are like, yeah, whatever, Maria's not fun anymore. But the 17-year-olds, they're like, wow, Maria's amazing. So even if it's just for our own ego, please bring us your students, take us to your students. And we've in fact we I also run a thing called the Center for the Study of Women and Gender. And precisely because gender is much more on the agenda now, we're increasingly getting contacts from schools saying our students want to set up a feminist club or a feminist whatever. Can you come, can you be involved? So we've actually created a little pool of PhD students, MA students, staff who want to come to schools and do things with schools. So we're ready
amazing.
for your invitations.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I've already sort of contacted you as well, ready to speak to my students. I know that they do want to, lots of them do now want to apply to Warwick from speaking to you. And it sort of raises aspirations as well for students as well. And
Yeah.
also, I think what they really liked is that you're a real life sociologist. Do you know what I mean? They're like, oh, that's what they took away from it. I mean, they had a really good discussion, but also I think it's nice for them to see that sociologists aren't just, they're not alive basically. So actually it was really exciting. So you'll be maybe like worried now you said that. You'll probably have loads of like emails in your inbox going, hello,
Well, we'll see.
hello,
We'll see
hello.
how
So,
how popular your podcast is. It'll be a nice test of the popularity of your podcast and of my contribution to it.
oh, thank you for your time, and I will definitely be in touch again. I wish I lived nearer to Warwick, because that would be like, for my students, would be amazing to come to. But obviously, the great thing about the virtual world when it's working is that we can sort of make these connections this way. Thank you for your time, as
Thank you.
always, and your genuine enthusiasm for sociology, and I love it that it doesn't disappear. That sort of, it's almost like, sometimes you think, oh, if they're a lecturer, they might not be like, oh, because when I think when I was at university, it was like someone reading from like a piece of paper that didn't look up from, from there.
Oh no, no, we try to be different now, and I couldn't even just read from a paper because I just get so excited, so and then take up too long. That is my big problem in lectures, and I guess in podcasts is I talk for too long. So thank you for having me and for listening to
Thank
me
you, and
all
have
this
a good
time.
day. Thank you,
Thank
thank you
you.
for your day, thank you for your time, and I love your wallpaper, by the way. See you, bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.